Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers Review the Week, where we bring you the best of the past 7 days. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking back at some highlights from the week, whether US President Barack Obama should or indeed can shut down Guantanamo Bay. We'll ask if corporate tax avoidance can ever be a good thing, and we'll look at the fallout from Super Tuesday and what it means for the future of the US presidential race. On January 22, 2009, just 2 days after he was sworn in as President of the United States, Barack Obama signed an executive order to close Guantanamo Bay. Now, 7 years later, he wants to make good on that promise and close the prison's gates once and for all. As his second term draws to a close, the president is looking to secure his legacy, but he still has an uphill struggle ahead of him. The Newsmakers' Sandra Gutman filed this report.
By the authority vested in me as President by the Constitution and the laws of the United States of America, in order to effect the appropriate disposition of individuals currently detained by the Department of Defense at Guantanamo, and promptly to close the detention facility at Guantanamo. There we go.
It was one of President Barack Obama's campaign promises and first executive orders. But after 2 terms in office, he's still failed to close Guantanamo Bay. The high-security facility in Cuba was America's response to 9/11. When then-President George W. Bush opened the prison in 2002, he filled it with nearly 800 suspected militants as part of his war on terror. His administration labeled the prisoners hardened killers. But to justice advocates, the camp was a place of shame, where suspects were locked up, many without charge. In the eyes of critics, Guantanamo Bay operates outside the law. Its location in Cuba allowed it to evade international human rights laws until the U.S. Supreme Court ruled otherwise. The legality of certain torture methods was also disputed, including force-feeding inmates on hunger strike and waterboarding.
Inside the interrogation room, but sometimes you can hear some people screaming and like that, but you can never see what's going on there.
The White House has made a fiscal case for shutting down the facility and saving almost $2 billion over the next 20 years. But Obama's biggest argument for closure is that Guantanamo has acted as a rallying cry for America's enemies and has been used as a recruitment tool for terrorism. Obama's plan to close Guantanamo affects the 91 remaining detainees. 35 prisoners have already been cleared for transfer to other countries. 10 inmates will be allowed to continue their trials at military courts. The rest are likely to be moved to different U.S. facilities and have their reviews for detention accelerated. Prisoners deemed too dangerous may be detained indefinitely. But Republicans say the plan is flawed. They argue it's both unsafe and illegal for the military to bring Guantanamo detainees into the U.S. President Obama will have to push his plan through the Republican-controlled Congress and fight public opposition. Moving detainees to the mainland is highly unpopular. Polls suggest more than half of Americans are opposed to closing the prison. Obama's last resort is to issue an executive order to unilaterally close Guantanamo Bay, a final chance to fulfill his campaign promise and shape his legacy. Sandra Gutman, The Newsmakers.
On Monday's show, I was joined by journalist and award-winning artist Molly Crabapple and Tom Rogan, a columnist for The National Review. Take a look at how they disagreed over whether Guantanamo should be closed or not.
Critical issue is whether it is more in the United States' interest to release these people and to gamble that they won't be involved in terrorist campaigns around the world, or whether it is better to detain them.
Okay,
and I come down on the side that it is better to detain them. And I think
Sure.
the majority of the American people,
Let's get a
frankly,
response
people
from
around
Molly.
the world would agree with that.
Okay, let's get a response, Molly.
But this is not fact-based. This is primarily based on emotion, not fact. I mean, perhaps it would make America safer if they all put us into comas. I mean, that's not what America is based on. America is a country based on the rule of law, and it's based on a certain respect for freedom. And you cannot just go around kidnapping people, having them tortured by foreign intelligence services, which is what you're referring to with the Jordanians, and then keeping them in an island prison outside of the rule of law because you're afraid that if you release them, they might join a terrorist group that was not even in existence when they were originally detained.
It was US President Benjamin Franklin who said there are only two certainties in this world: death and taxes. Well, in today's globalized world, it seems that taxes are far from certain. Some of the biggest multinational companies are using ever more complex methods to minimize the amount of tax they pay to the countries in which they operate. And understandably, those countries are not too happy about it. But not everyone agrees that tax avoidance is a bad thing. In fact, some economists say that big job creators like Starbucks and Google should be allowed to get creative with their tax affairs as long as it's within the law. Gracie Jerome had this report.
It's a scandal that has rocked the world of business. Some of the richest corporations on the planet using loopholes to avoid paying their fair share of tax. Cash-strapped governments looking for revenue are cracking down on multinationals to pay their taxes in the countries where they operate. Public opinion is turning against companies like Amazon and Starbucks, who've dodged high tax bills in the US. And France is now seeking more than $1.7 billion in unpaid taxes from Google. But these companies say they're being unfairly victimized, and their tax minimizing strategies are entirely legal. There's a difference between tax evasion and avoidance. Evasion is the illegal non-payment or underpayment of tax. Avoidance is the arrangement of one's financial affairs to minimize tax liability within the law. Google and other tech giants use avoidance, and this is how. The US company is based in California, but bases its overseas operations in Ireland, which offers low corporation tax. That's where nearly all international ad sales go. Royalties are then paid to Google's subsidiary in the Netherlands, which has a low tax because it's another EU country. That revenue is then shuttled to Google's Irish office in Bermuda, another tax haven. Last year, Google moved over 10 billion euros without paying tax. The funds are invested back into Google's headquarters in Dublin, a tax move known as the Double Irish. All that has allowed Google to enjoy a 6% tax rate for its overseas sales. Companies like Facebook, Microsoft, and McDonald's have all used similar strategies, which governments are only just beginning to wake up to. When it comes to fighting multinational tax avoidance, politicians are singing from the same hymn sheet.
In the end, it's about fighting inequality, because it's insufferable to see big groups escaping from this while small and medium enterprises are obliged to pay.
But there's a growing chorus of voices arguing that, in fact, corporations shouldn't pay tax, that taxing companies hits the pockets of employees the hardest, and that shareholders should be the ones paying tax on earnings. There's also a fear in countries like Ireland and Bermuda that stricter rules will scare away investment. While companies are battling governments in court, countries are racing to close down tax avoidance schemes. Ireland has already vowed to phase out the double Irish tax loophole by 2020, but with trillions of dollars at stake, that gives some of the world's smartest people 5 years to find another one. Gracie Jerome, The Newsmakers.
On Tuesday's show, I was joined by Alex Cobham, Research Director at the Tax Justice Network in London, and Tim Worstel from the Adam Smith Institute. Have a look at how they fundamentally disagreed over the issue of corporate tax avoidance.
They have three problems, really, when they're dealing with taxation, especially this corporate international taxation. Firstly, they're wrong in theory. Secondly, they're wrong in their particulars of their analysis of what's going on. And they seem to be working off pretty much entirely made-up numbers all the way along. It's the shareholders in the company getting taxed, and it's all the workers in the jurisdiction who are imposing that tax. Now, it's just not the company that's paying the tax. So anybody who starts going around saying companies must pay more tax is just wrong. I mean,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Okay, let's get a response then from Alex.
Tim,
okay, Alex, so
okay,
it's
Tim,
people paying
I
tax,
didn't say
not
that
corporations. Go ahead.
Yeah, I said precisely that it's people paying the tax, not companies. I don't know who Tim's responding to, but he's not responding to what I just said there. Companies are just structures through which the tax passes as the profit. The people who pay the tax are shareholders and the top executives whose pay is very closely related. But Tim does refer to some incidence research, which is highly out of date. You know, what we find, all the most recent research shows that the majority of the tax is paid by shareholders and by those top executives. So it's paid by people at the top end. There's no question it's borne in any serious way by the average worker. It's simply not. Most of the incidence is very much at the top end.
Well, yes,
and that's what this tax is.
Alex, Alex, that's terribly interesting, but I'm afraid all of the economic research on the subject is against that view.
Tim, you can say all the economic research as much as you like, but it's simply not true.
It's billed as the blockbuster event of primary season, and this year, Super Tuesday didn't disappoint. Trump marched to victory for the Republicans, while Clinton clinched the top spot for the Democrats. And the battle for the White House between the pair looked even closer to becoming the real deal. The choice for the next president of the United States is becoming clearer.
This has been an amazing evening.
Thank you, Texas!
The biggest day in the battle for candidates saw the gap between hopefuls widen.
That would be a disaster for Republicans.
It's not just about electing a president, it is about transforming America.
Donald Trump will be an embarrassment to America.
And the stakes rise.
We're going to make America great again, folks.
America never stopped being great.
Super Tuesday allocates the most delegates in one go, with 13 states and 1 U.S. territory voting.
What a Super Tuesday!
Hillary Clinton left her rival behind, winning 7 states. She also won the territory of American Samoa. Bernie Sanders won 4, although Colorado doesn't select its delegates until April. As it stands, Clinton has 1,001 delegates, almost half of the 2,383 delegates needed to win the nomination, while Sanders has 371. The winning streak continued for Donald Trump, taking 7 states. His nearest rival, Ted Cruz, won 3, including Texas, which had the most delegates up for grabs. And the next closest hopeful, Marco Rubio, took just 1. Trump now has 285 delegates, Cruz 161, and Rubio 87. Republicans need 1,237 delegates to win the nomination. With Trump streaking ahead of his Republican rivals, Ted Cruz has called for the others to bow out.
That our campaign is the only campaign that has beaten, that can beat, and that will beat Donald Trump.
It now seems likely the battle for the White House will be fought between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton.
Chris, thank you very much.
And the rhetoric has already shifted, sounding more like a presidential race.
The stakes in this election have never been higher. And the rhetoric we're hearing on the other side has never been lower.
The tone of Donald Trump's victory speech was more measured than his usual style.
I am a unifier. Once we get all of this finished, I'm going to go after one person. That's Hillary Clinton.
5 more states will vote for their preference later this week. But the outcome of Super Tuesday seems to have set the stage for a Clinton-Trump presidential face-off. Well, to discuss the aftermath of Super Tuesday, I was joined by Democrat supporter, lawyer and journalist Raul Reyes and political activist and Republican Christopher Barron. Let's take a look at what they felt a Trump-Clinton presidential race would mean to their respective parties.
There was a very bad day for conservatives. We're watching a hostile takeover of the Republican Party by a reality TV star who frankly holds positions that are a complete and total anathema to most conservatives in this country.
Well, let me put the same question then to Raul. As a Democrat, would you be comfortable with Hillary Clinton as your candidate.
Yes, sir. But I would like to add that at this point, although Super Tuesday has tremendous significance because of the number of delegates and all of the states involved, even on the Democratic side, the race is far from over. And one big reason for that is that Bernie Sanders is sitting upon so much money. He raised, in February alone, I believe he raised $41 million. Just on Monday night, he raised $6 million. So as long as he has won a few contests, he can keep going on to states like Michigan and California. He has the funds to keep doing that because these are the states that are likely to favor him. So he's going forward. He's certainly leading a movement of millennials and young people who are not at all ready to give up.
Last week, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan visited his Nigerian counterpart, Muhammadu Buhari, to deepen bilateral ties. Buhari won the presidency in a historic election for Nigeria. But nearly a year on from that victory, some in Nigeria feel he hasn't delivered on his promises to defeat the country's Boko Haram insurgency and eliminate corruption from government. Jerome Evans had this report.
Nigeria is Africa's most populous nation and richest economy. Oil was the fuel that fired the country's economic boom. But with oil prices falling fast, Nigeria now finds itself facing an economic crisis. The government of Muhammadu Buhari, elected 1 year ago on a promise to fight corruption, has vowed to crack down on people who use public money to line their own pockets. One strategy has been a war on so-called ghost workers. The government has uncovered nearly 24,000 people who do not exist, but are drawing salaries. They've been struck off the payroll, making a saving of $11 million a month. But some say it's not enough.
There's so much waste, there's so much theft that goes on within that space. So that's where the challenge is. I think if we can set that right, which I think it's not doing right enough, it's not doing well enough. If we can set that right, that we can have a more transparent, a more accountable system for public funds.
Nigeria's finance ministry says keeping a tight hold on the national purse strings will boost the country's budget at a time when state coffers are depleted. Nigeria is also looking to diversify its economy. It's trying to form new links with trade partners, including Turkey. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan met Muhammadu Buhari on Wednesday. He's accompanied by a trade delegation looking out for business opportunities. But with opportunity comes risk. Africa's largest economy faces a number of problems: high inequality, poor infrastructure, and raging insurgency in the northeast. Boko Haram wants to create a caliphate centered around the town of Maiduguri. Since 2009, it's been battling government forces. The armed groups killed more than 17,000 people, destroyed more than 1,000 schools, and more than 1.5 million have been displaced. Muhammadu Buhari claims that during the height of the insurgency, funds earmarked for fighting Boko Haram were stolen by corrupt officials. Nigeria's problems of corruption, poverty, inequality, and security are all connected. And observers say fighting them in isolation won't work. So the new president faces an uphill struggle to change the face of Nigeria and repair the country's international reputation. Jerome Evans, The Newsmakers.
Germany's top court is being urged to ban the extreme right National Democratic Party. The party, the state says, is founded on racism, anti-Semitism, and revisionist ideology. But the NPD says their party fills a political gap at a time when many Germans are concerned by the refugee crisis affecting the continent. But where should the line be drawn in banning political parties? Could such a policy be used to silence free speech or create a totalitarian regime? And does driving parties underground make them even more extreme, more violent? Soraya Lenny explains.
It's in this room that Germany could rid itself of what some people consider a dangerous scourge. The right-wing National Democratic Party, or the NPD. The Federal Constitutional Court has the power to decide this.
Parties are considered unconstitutional if their goal or behavior of their supporters aim to affect or eliminate the democratic fundamental order.
The German government backs the ban and wants to see the NPD gone. It has very good reasons.
It is anti-Semitic, it's xenophobic, and it's one of the intellectual instigators behind the violence, at least indirectly, which we have to deal with in many parts of Germany these days.
Violence is what sparked the NPD. It rose out of the ruins of World War II Germany. It was established in 1964 as a successor to the German Reich Party. Critics say effectively its policies mirror some of the Nazi parties: anti-immigration, anti-multiculturalism. The party began to see an upsurge in ideological support. So much so that by the year 2000, German officials said violence against immigrants had reached the highest level since the Second World War. At least 10 people were murdered, mostly Germans of Turkish origin. The attacks were blamed on Nazi sympathizers and those tied to groups like the NPD. The violence forced the state's hand and it tried to ban the party, but it failed. So now it's trying again. The rise of the right has left a bitter taste in the Chancellor's mouth. Angela Merkel is under pressure to put a lid on them. The case to ban the NPD comes at a time when record numbers of migrants are arriving at Europe's borders. The influx of people into the EU, most notably Germany, is playing into the hands of its anti-immigration platform. But the NPD and its supporters say banning the party crushes the right to freedom of expression and political representation.
If we look at the broader political context, then we do see that the NPD is highly relevant, because all the things the NPD has been warning against for years is happening now on the political stage.
Right-wing parties are exploiting rising xenophobia. But at least for the NPD, that hasn't translated to rising political success. It's never received enough political support to enter parliament. But at the moment, it doesn't need a political mandate to rally Germans behind right-wing discourse. Soraya Lenny, The Newsmakers.
On Thursday, I spoke to journalist Yanis Baboulias and Aneta Kahana from the Amadeo Antonio Foundation. She said banning the NPD is a way for politicians to dodge dealing with ultranationalism at the root.
I think some politicians have the motivation to ban the NPD just because they don't want to discuss the issues. They don't want to really fight right-wing extremism, racism and all this. They don't really want to stand up for immigration or for the protection of immigrants. And you know, it's more easy. It's more easy to ban than this political party than to take a position. And if the NPD is not there, there will be another party to take over this attitude. So you have to discuss these problems, and you have to take some measures.
Now for our Picture This of the week. On Wednesday, 3 astronauts returned safely to Earth after a near year-long mission to the International Space Station. Their stay, which was more than double the length of a normal space visit, was part of a study to measure the long-term effects of space travel on the human body. Let's take a look. the week that was. A week that saw Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton triumph on Super Tuesday. A week that we asked if Germany should ban extreme right party, the NPD. And a week that we analyzed the pros and cons of corporate tax avoidance. Next week, we'll be looking at the Turkey-EU summit taking place in Brussels as the two regional powerhouses try to tackle the refugee crisis. On the second anniversary of the disappearance of the Malaysian Airlines flight MH370, we'll ask how people respond to unsolved mysteries, and we'll look at the threats posed by nuclear power if it falls into the wrong hands. You've been watching the Newsmakers Review the Week with me, Imran Gupta. As always, thank you for watching. See you soon. Bye-bye.